Hello and welcome to the K-State Garden Hour webinar series. We are so glad that you're here with us today. This webinar series started in 2020 and has been a collaboration of the entire K-State Horticulture Extension team. Since the start of the program, we've reached over 113,000 gardeners just like you. We are pleased to continue offering the K-State Garden Hour series for free. If you have enjoyed listening or coming to these webinars, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to support this program. The link to donate can be found in the chat or on our K-State Garden Hour website. This webinar is hosted by Kansas State Extension. My name is Kenny Dodson. I'm the horticulture agent from the Wildcat District down in southeast Kansas, covering Wilson, Labette, Montgomery, and Crawford counties. Everyone involved in this program is an extension professional for K-State. Most of us have a background in horticultural education or a related discipline. But most of all, we each have a love of education and sharing important gardening topics. I personally love this webinar series not only because it connects people around the state of Kansas, people from outside of Kansas as well in the chat. It also helps us provide very educational, timely, and important topics like the one we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping rules to go over. Please use the Q&A feature for questions related to this presentation during the webinar. This is where we will look for questions at the end of the webinar as well for the Q&A session. You should see a button along the bottom of your screen or your Zoom window that says Q&A. It may also be within a 3 dots more button farther in the menu there. Just click on that and you'll be able to enter your question for us to answer. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will post it to our K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to the topic as well. If we share links through the chat, we will also link them on the website. You won't miss them. Our website is also where you'll have access to previous topics and upcoming topics in this series. Our moderators today are going to be Cassie Thiessen and Matt McKernan, and they'll be sharing information through the chat during the presentation, and they'll also help us facilitate the Q&A portion of our webinar. Today's topic is addressing food insecurity through extension. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, who is, oh my gosh, Anthony Reardon. I'm so sorry. Please give us a few moments while we get his slides ready and the presentation started.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Kenny. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Reardon. I am the Horticulture Small Farms Extension Agent for Johnson County, Kansas, which is here in the Kansas City metro area. My specific position as the Horticulture Small Farms Agent is not necessarily an ornamentals focus, but it's a focus on that production of your fruits and vegetables and support of specialty crops and local food systems in general. So, as far as this topic goes, it's something I'm very passionate about. It's something that I'm very well informed on, and it's a very interesting topic to discuss because there's so many realms or directions you can kind of go with it. As you'll come to find as we discuss really food systems in general, it's something that is highly nuanced and highly just interconnected and variable as far as the ways these pieces sort of interact with each other. So it is complicated, and I don't want you all to see this and just be like, this is going over my head. I don't know, understand. I just thought I was going to learn about gardening today. The thing is, it is all adjacent to gardening. It's adjacent to a lot of these pieces that we're working within. And so, as we get into what we're actually going to be talking about here, I did set a few objectives, and you probably saw those in the welcoming poll. I don't have that in front of me right now. But the few things I want you to try to keep an eye out for as we go through these presentations are ways to describe the many ways extension support for food security, the ways to explain the factors that contribute to food insecurity in general. We're going to go kind of through the whole way that food systems kind of operate, and you'll be able to start identifying where those pieces fall into place. Also, if you happen to notice throughout this different ways to engage throughout your particular community. That's kind of the point. I've kind of scoured the state of Kansas as far as different initiatives going on, so we can kind of highlight different spots throughout the state and ways to help when it comes to food security. And also just local resources in general. We have a lot of resources throughout K-State that particularly address food security. So First, we probably need to define what is food insecurity. So, looking at the technical dictionary definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, it's the condition of not having access to sufficient food or food of an adequate quantity to meet one's basic needs. Now, I will say this is probably your most basic of an explanation in that it's only addressing food security from I have it and I don't have it. But that is, as you'll come to find, something that's it's highly more nuanced than that. For an example, there's something also known as food swamps. So here in Johnson County, for example, we have plentiful access to food in general because there are gas stations on every corner or there's fast food in every location. But that doesn't mean that it's nutritional food that is going to sustain you long term. So that's what as opposed to a food desert where there's no food in general nearby. A food swamp is where there's no actual food that can keep you long term going. So that's another thing to keep in mind when it comes to food insecurity. It's not just a lack of food, but the right kind of food. And then also there's something like cultural considerations. For an example, there's a community garden we work with, or that I work with, that one year donated a ton of bok choy to a local pantry. Fortunately, a lot of people did not know how to prepare and cook bok choy, so that food really wasn't very useful. So that's another example of, that it could be food in general, but if people don't know how to utilize it because of cultural considerations, then is that really contributing to food security? So as you'll see, the systems level, intricacies of this are really where you have to kind of pay attention to food insecurity. And so when it comes to Kansas in general, this is a map that is from Hunger Free Kansas. I believe Matt's going to share that link in the chat there. But this is just in relation to childhood food insecurity. It's not even, all food insecurity. And as you can see, there's not a single county throughout Kansas that does not experience food insecurity to some kind of level. Within the United States in general, over 44 million people, including 13 million children, live in households that struggle to afford enough food to be able to be nutritionally balanced and well fed. And so, why does this matter? Well, health impacts of food insecurity are vast and wide. Here in the U.S., it's a thing where you're going to be seeing a lot more instances of chronic disease, a lot more instances of obesity and malnutrition in general. Mentally, this is going to create behavioral issues potentially. It's going to create poor concentration, poor performance in general in jobs and work and life, and also depression and stress and anxiety from not being able to secure that food. And then even looking at different age groups, you're going to find different effects. So when children specifically, you're going to see impaired growth. Frequent illness is going to be more of a factor, and then trouble learning and developing as a child is going to happen as well. And then even in your older adults, worsening of chronic conditions that could be treated by nutritious food is something that can be seen. And so something that is commonly related to this is a thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which essentially explains that when physiological needs are not met by a person, it does not create a strong foundation for achieving one's fullest potential. So when we say physiological needs, we're literally talking breathing, water, shelter, sleep. Food is along that line, right? You need food to survive. And so when it comes to other pieces of just being a self-actualized person that are, not as critical. Those all kind of fall to the wayside as you don't meet those physiological needs. That means your safety and security, love and belonging, self-esteem, and as you can see, it's a kind of a system where if you don't have those basic needs, it's going to create more and more problems for you. As far as food gardening goes in relation to this, a lot of people will, say, well, grow a garden if you don't have food. But again, that's something that you need access to in the beginning. If you don't have your physiological needs being met, you probably don't have the resources to be growing a garden in general to have access to that food. So, something to keep in mind as we keep moving forward through this. So, to understand food insecurity, we must understand food systems first. And I put this slide in here specifically for this transition because food systems, as I mentioned, they're highly nuanced. So I'm going to try my best to explain this within, the hour span that we have here. But I do have a graphic here. It's from the Austin Travis County Food Plan. They do have a excellent plan put together that was implemented about a year back now, or a year or two. But it kind of explains each of the regions within a food system. So the one that you are probably all immediately familiar with would be your food production. So this would be where your farms, your gardens, any of your suppliers and education programs. That's what kind of the beginning point of where your food is going to be coming from, right? But it doesn't stop there. There's actually several other points within a system because it's the nature of a system. There's a rotation happening there that the food moves through. So going on from your food production, that then goes to food processing and distribution. So that can include your food hubs, commercial kitchens, your transportation, your aggregation sites. These are all the places that are actually distributing your food. And then you have your food markets and retail. So that would be obviously your farmers markets, your grocery stores, or it could even be something along the lines of like a CSA or an institution or restaurants. Then moving along from that point, we have the food consumption aspect. So that is where your food pantries come into play, and all of your education on nutrition and your actual knowledge of being able to process and consume that food. And then moving on from that, you have food waste because it's an important part of our food systems is reclaiming all of these inputs throughout our system that have gone into making that food. So instead of having that all go into a landfill where it's going to have carbon emissions and fill the landfill faster than it needs to, recover that food waste and it can either go into composting or if it's still good to eat, it could actually be redistributed elsewhere. And then there in the middle, you'll see something called food justice. And that's something that's unique to the Austin Travis County plan. But this is where advocacy and policy and nonprofits and education kind of fall in because it interacts with every single piece of the food system. And so when looking at this in relation to K-State in general, you'll see that, or K-State Extension in general, you'll see there are five critical issues that we tackle through K-State Extension actually all relate directly back to food systems. And I'm going to go much more into depth in this as far as how they relate. But these do include global food systems, obviously, community vitality, which would be like supporting all of these food businesses that we saw throughout the food processing and grocery store, or I apologize, the retail portions of this. And then there's also the health aspect, which would be going back to your consumption piece of the food system. And then water and natural resources, which relates back to, again, just the production in general and ensuring that those resources are available and preserved. And then developing tomorrow's leader, which is 4-H. But however, there's tons of food programs going on with 4-H as well, because tomorrow's leaders, they do in fact, or they are in fact the ones that are going to, maintain the sustainability of our current food system. And so relating each of those pieces back to the pieces of the food system in general, with your horticulture, agriculture, and natural resources, you're going to be looking at helping in the production and access and recovery and equity areas where they're going to be essentially helping to produce efficient and sustainable food production. And this can be through areas of, maybe you've got an extension office with a specialty crop production or farms, or you've got even our research farms that are helping along in those areas. Demonstration gardens, community gardens, composting and soil health and water initiatives, and obviously all of the ecology initiatives. Maybe there's a master naturalist program going on in your area. This helps to build a foundation for a resilient, long-term local production with minimal environmental impact. And you'll notice that I use the term resilient there. So when I say resilient and sustainable, there are a bit of different meanings, especially when it comes to, your food systems in general. Resilient means that it's going to be in the short term able to withstand impacts that could affect it. So a good example here would be like when COVID hit, and all of the grocery stores all of a sudden had nothing on their shelves. Well, that resiliency would be something you can build up in the short term. Sustainability would then be how we're building it up in the long term so that it can continue to be maintained and operating efficiently. So just an example of this, and you'll see I have quite a few Johnson County examples throughout this. That's because of my proximity to Johnson County. I'm in it. However, there's plenty of other examples across the state as well. But I wanted to highlight the backyard garden here real quick. They are one of our demonstration gardens. They've been there for 20 years now, and they average almost 5,000 pounds of produce a year. And in doing so, they're donating that to community pantries while educating the public about ways that they can grow food in their own gardens. And then moving on to our family and consumer science section, they help a lot as well when it comes to the nutrition aspect of the food cycle. So when it comes to processing, access, consumption, equity, they're helping to bridge what is grown with the use and preservation and ultimate utilization of that food. This can include your cooking and nutrition classes, preservation classes, access initiatives, food safety classes. Or even, sometimes the agents will combine to do classes like here in Johnson County, we have our Dig Your Dinner series where I teach about how to grow particular pieces of produce, while our FCS agent Chelsea King teaches about the nutrition and the cooking and the preservation of that specific produce. And then the impact of this is that it's going to help ensure that local food goes beyond being grown. It's nourishing our community. And another example of this, again, a Johnson County example, would be the Kitchen Restore program that they have here, where essentially they collect donated pieces of unused kitchen equipment and they create packs to distribute to the community. So they have the resources to be able to actually process that food as it's meant to be processed. So, just in 2025, they distributed 111 kits to people, benefiting 375 individuals. And it makes a big difference in as far as what people are able to do with the food they have access to. And then looking at our community vitality, specialization within extension, this one really helps with infrastructure within the food system, right? And policy and collaboration. So essentially, all of those businesses that are operating throughout the entire pieces of the cycle, they are all falling into community vitality because a community is not thriving if their businesses aren't succeeding. So this supports your distribution, your access, recovery, and equity. And some examples of this would be business connection assistance, policy and permit assistance, collaboration building, grant connection. Facilitation is something I would add to this. We do have our facilitation initiative through K-State as well that's been doing excellent work throughout communities. And then, that big picture meeting facilitation, I suppose, is exactly what that would be. And this impact is building structural supports that make food access efforts sustainable and resilient. So an example of this that's going on at K-State would be our community food systems team. So this is an entire team of specialists that we have dedicated specifically to Kansas local foods. So they help support resilient local regional food systems with technical assistance. So they're helping people essentially develop these food system initiatives, education, research, and coordination. They also run the Kansas Food Business Startup Summit for food and farm entrepreneurs, so helping those businesses get going. They also provide coaching and planning and business development support, and they're connecting those businesses to reduce waste and lower costs. So they're helping through the entire process of getting these food systems initiatives established, essentially. And then, as I mentioned, 4-H can also be part of this. So, again, tomorrow's leaders are the people that are operating our food systems. So, education and leadership and career pathways is a big factor here. This supports production and consumption and the other factors that go into a well-functioning food system. Examples of these programs could be the Junior Master Gardener program or the 4-H Horticulture Judging Team, and even the 4-H Horticulture projects that get entered into local fairs. And so, as you see here, I've made these very easy to read little graphics that are not complicated whatsoever. But here, this is just kind of to give you a visualization of all the overlaps between food systems and the specialties of extension. Every specialty within extension has multiple and applications into areas of the food system. So they're very much intertwined and intermingled. And again, that goes back to food being a very basic need or a foundational need for human health and development. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about food systems in general? So in order to understand, food access in general, you have to understand food systems because they are so highly nuanced and interconnected, and interdependent is really an important word there. I like to kind of compare them to, the cogs of like an antique clock. So we've got this visual here. So picture, say, a cog that is way off on the edge. It breaks. Well, suddenly one piece that was connected to that doesn't work now, right? And then the other ones that are connected to that are not working as efficiently. This is kind of exactly what happens throughout your food systems as you see pieces kind of break or get removed or what have you. All of the other pieces struggle to function as they were meant to function when they aren't operating efficiently. So you overall see a decreased resiliency and effectiveness, which results in decreased food access. And with us being an extension and having so many arms out into all of the different pieces of the food system in general, we have a strong ability to make a positive impact in kind of lessening or dampening the effects of any cogs that are not functioning properly. And so I do have a handful of examples here that I kind of wanted to point out as far as broken cogs and ripple effects within the food system. So one example here would be not having enough local production of food. And this could be caused by fewer small farms. It could be, you could have, say, like an aging grower population where they don't have a succession plan. And so their farms are just going out of business. There could be cost barriers to the land because the land's just too expensive. Or you could be seeing, extreme weather events that are taking out, the efficiency of these farms to a point where they can't operate. So the effects that you're going to see with this would be things like higher locally priced food. Well, then you're potentially having less access and equity, and you're probably not going to be getting quite as nutritional food as you could be otherwise. Also, you're going to have less food at pantries and markets, which again, less access. Reduce food diversity as well, because there's only so much food that can grow within your local area. So you're not going to be seeing, or I'm sorry, so yes, there's not going to be so many varieties of food being grown within your area. Also, greater vulnerability to the supply chain in general, and greater environmental impacts. Because remember, if you have to ship in all of your food, that causes greenhouse emissions that are going to be contributing ultimately to sort of these extreme pressures that our farms are seeing. Another example of a cog would be, say, there's a lack of local processing. So this would include some places like a commercial kitchen or a place that could be like a cold storage type unit. And I think I actually have that on another slide, so we'll get back to that. But essentially, there's no places available for freezing or canning or packaging, and there's a need to have to travel long distances at high cost to be able to do that. And so ultimately, what this will equate to is farmers not being able to generate those value added products. So, those value added, that means products made from a crop. And essentially, you're just getting, again, less diversity in the food that's available to you. So, there's only so much that can be done with it. So, effects that you're going to see from this would be more food waste. If you can't process it, and there's only so many people looking for fresh produce, you're probably going to get some food waste out of that, unfortunately. And then there's a lot of depleted resources and inefficient use of resources. Reduced income opportunities for farmers. So those farmers are going to be less able to stay in business. And then limited options for pantries with shelf-stable items. So not all pantries actually have refrigeration units. So if you aren't giving them shelf-stable items, it's going to equate to less food there and less nutrition within the community, and a loss of market for culturally important foods. So that again just ties into less access and equity when it comes to your food. Another example, so that you could have a cog that is a distribution breakdown. Again, kind of alluding back to what we saw with COVID, right? But say another example, there's no place to aggregate food for small growers. There's high transportation costs, or there's limited cold storage, as I mentioned, fragmented connections between growers and sellers in general. So you'll see this a lot when it comes to sort of your local producers that are producing a specific amount of food that's big enough that they can't necessarily get rid of all of it or get rid of distribute all of it through their local connections, but they are also aren't growing enough that they can just be a wholesale distributor. So that's where your food hubs kind of come into play, where they can sort of aggregate those foods, mix it with more food coming in from a second producer, and then distribute that for you. So the effects of this would be less food at pantries and markets, smaller growers that can't reach customers. Food, again, is traveling further, and those access disparities are widening. And I know I'm giving several examples here. I promise this is my last cog analogy, but another one would be access paths are limited or unequal. So say there's food deserts or transit deserts, or there's high cost of fresh produce, or there's a lack of culturally relevant or desired food is really a big factor as well, or a strain on food pantries. All of these things ultimately equate to households skipping fresh produce in general. So that's hurting your nutrition and, access. And then also health disparities widen, and your local food in general is unavailable for those who need it most. And so all of this, transitioning out of my analogies here, it ties back to, in general, what we would refer to as a wicked problem. And so this is a term initially coined in 1973 by theorist Horst Riddle and Melvin Weber. And essentially what it means that is it's meant to describe situations or social issues that are difficult to define and harder to solve. So in this situation, it's very complex, interconnected, and it does not have one singular solution. However, you also can't just ignore it. That's the biggest facet that you have to pay attention to there is that if you do ignore it, what's going to happen is that it's going to overall worsen and become more and more difficult to address. So you have to kind of stay on top of it and address those broken cogs as they show up, in order to keep it operating as efficiently as possible. And now we get to the portion of this presentation where we actually talk about, well, what can we do about it, right? So in order to build resiliency, so our systems absorb the stress, they fix those broken cogs, and they adapt and function properly, there's many pathways to explore. Some of the strategies include diversifying and strengthening your local production, improving food access pathways in general for pantries and gardens, through pantries and gardens, teaching sustainable growing practices, which we'll talk about more with it when it comes to the volunteer opportunities, and centering your community voice. No one's going to know more about how food access is affecting a community than the community that is actually being affected by it, right? So you need to get out into your community and kind of just ask around, well, what do you need? And then educating yourself on policies in general, particularly local policies. Just know that when it comes to even things as simple as, oh, you can't have a compost bin in your backyard, that can ultimately affect the effectiveness of food access, right? Because you're not going to have as good of soil, and then your food's not going to grow as well. You're not going to have as much production. So look at the policies that are happening around you to be sure that what you're supporting is able to help food access. And so ways to get involved. I wanted to first kind of highlight the Extension Master Gardener program here, because they contribute to multiple cogs within the system. They produce food for donation and demonstration. They teach home gardening skills. They promote sustainable practices. They partner with local organizations, and they address gaps and opportunities that can be fixed within their communities. So an example here in Douglas County specifically would be the EMG food collection program, where they essentially every Saturday for 6 months go to their local farmers markets and they collect produce that has not been utilized. And this is then distributed to local food pantries. As you can see from those numbers there, within the last 2 years, they've distributed over 20,000 pounds of produce through this program to their local pantries. Another example would be in Sedgwick County. So they have the Plant a Row program in Sedgwick County. And this is something, it's particular to Sedgwick County specifically. However, can easily be practiced anywhere else, where they are essentially encouraging people to plant an extra row of produce within their garden. And that extra row, anything that gets produced in it, goes to local food pantries. They are also in Sedgwick County heavily involved in the ICT Food Circle, which is a great local resource to help kind of find those local food initiatives going on. So I'd say wherever you live, try to look for those local food initiatives because especially in your more urban areas, which granted it's this all of Kansas that's watching, you're going to have particular websites that have lists of local food entities that can be supported or helped or that you can be involved with. So in Wichita's case here, there would be a local food directory, a local food event calendar, and they even have a shopping guide for ways to support local food. And then there's also this seed library programming that is happening in Butler County. So they actually have 13 different seed library locations throughout their entire county. It's managed by the Master Gardeners. And to date, they have distributed 26,000 seed packets throughout their county. So this is another example of, oh, I didn't think of that, contributing to food systems, but ultimately it is, right? Because it's getting a way to procure food to people. And over this program, they've had 250 volunteer hours contributing over the last 2 years to make this happen. So they're very passionate about it and very hardworking, and it's been very successful for them. Also in Butler County, they have the Augusta Community Garden Plant Trials, which is their longest demonstration garden, and they produce up to 1,000 pounds of produce every year there. In Harvey County, they also have a demonstration garden of that nature, and they there produce 3,000 to 6,000 pounds of produce every year that is donated to the Salvation Army. Over the span of that program, it's been over 80,000 pounds of produce donated. So it's a very productive garden. It's a very long-running garden, and that's a great example of something, if you're a master gardener, that you can get involved in that area. And then in the Meadowlark District, if you happen to live in that area, they have recently partnered with the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation Master Gardener, with the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation and the Master Gardeners have collaborated. So in 2025, they grew and distributed 3,000 plant seedlings to their community and across Kansas. And again, you are providing a pathway that ultimately results in access to food. So as you can imagine here, it is t that time of year where many locations are accepting different ways to address, excuse me, where many locations are accepting their Master Gardener applications. So this does ultimately vary by the location that you are at. Some locations have closed. However, if you are looking to get involved with these different types of places or initiatives, please give them a shout out so you can just get in touch with your local extension office to see what's available. And so I wanted to highlight a few more ways that you can support local food systems, even if you weren't to become necessarily a master gardener. You can also just, in general, volunteer in your local community. So in Reno County, for example, the extension office is involved with the Garden for Good, which is a 2-acre donation garden at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility, and they average 35,000 pounds of produce per year, two-thirds of which is actually going out into the community to local food pantries. And with that, they need people that are available to pick donations up for operations. They need help for transporting produce. They need help processing deliveries at pantries. And so I didn't actually even include a slide for time reasons about pantries in this um, presentation. However, pantries obviously are something that need a ton of support when it comes to volunteer opportunities. They're essentially almost always volunteer operated. So when it comes to organizing things and making sure that things are stocked and available for people, that is a great opportunity to help out when it comes to food systems. There are other ways to be able to support local food systems. that are a little bit more obvious, right? So there's joining a community garden. You can reach out to your local gardens to offer support. Many of your local extension offices in general are able to offer lists of all the community gardens in your area. So it's a great resource to be able to uh, reach out for, so that you can help out within your community. And you can even start a community garden. So again, reach out to your extension office because we have tons of resources for you, but we can also help with connections and support in general as that happens. I will say when it comes to establishing community gardens, management is probably the biggest issue on hand. But again, there's lots of community gardens out there that need volunteers. So if you're willing to be a manager of a community garden, that's a great way, horticulturally, that you can get involved in supporting food systems. There's also your seed libraries that need lots of help throughout the community. So, if you're not aware, there's many communities throughout Kansas that offer seed libraries. There's many through Extension and many more through public libraries of Kansas, which we'll talk about in our next slide. However, all of these need volunteers for operations. So seed donations are often needed. Volunteers can obviously help in that realm. Volunteers are usually needed for the organization of the seed libraries themselves because it is a bit of a tedious process. And then word of mouth is another big factor when it comes to just the success of a seed library. Oftentimes, or even in this list that I'll show you now, this is from the State Library of Kansas. They helped us out in collecting this, and we're very grateful. There's a good list of, I want to say like five or so locations where they said, well, we used to have a seed library, but unfortunately we had to shut it down because nobody knew about it. So just helping to get the word of mouth out there about seed libraries that are available really helps them thrive and helps food access through that channel. And as you can see here, there's many locations throughout the state of Kansas that offer seed libraries at their public libraries. So if you happen to see your name on here, that is a location you could potentially get involved with. So, looking at all of these, you need to keep in mind that collaborations ultimately strengthen the resiliency of a food system. All of our wicked problems, they're interconnected, and there's no single group that can solve them alone. So, collaborating, where multiple entities, multiple figures have different inputs, that overall just strengthens the approach to fixing any sort of cog that we're discussing, right? So this fills gaps across sectors in the food system. It reduces duplicated efforts and shares resources, but it also intentionally builds redundancy and sometimes duplicates efforts on purpose. So say if one section of that clock fails, then this section can step in and take care of it. And then also, especially with our Master Gardener work, it helps us multiply our efforts significantly. Those partnerships and having more and more resources at the table, it helps to overall have a greater impact. And so there are more ways to support food systems here. Obviously, if you are trying to participate in, like, say, a plant a row program, something that can be done through any part of the state, or even just looking to grow extra produce to grow in general, you would probably want to look at your high producing vegetables, right? So that would include your tomatoes, potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, zucchini, pumpkin, cucumber, cabbage, melons. I apologize for reading that whole list off to you, but again, you're probably familiar with the higher producing vegetables within your garden, and obviously, planting more of those, you're going to have an excess of produce to give away. So that is more produce that can then be given to a local pantry. I will say, if you want to get in touch with your local pantries, there are some certain foods that are more likely to fly off the shelves than others. So they can readily usually give you advice on we could use more squash this week instead of more tomatoes. Because I'll tell you, tomatoes are one food that everybody's going to have extra of. So it's not that the pantries don't want them, but at a certain point, they can only give away so many tomatoes as well. So growing a variety of extra produce can really help them out. And I do have here the Kansas Garden Guide listed. Just one example of our many publications and resources that can help you out. I actually gave Matt a full list of resources, so hopefully he can throw them in the chat there for you. But the garden guide would be a great starting point as far as knowing how to take care of all these resources. Just updated in 2023, so it's still very recent. And it's not only, tells you how to grow particular pieces of produce, but it goes through all of vegetable gardening in general, from pest management, disease management to growing in various seasons, etc. It's a great resource to have. Some other ways you can get involved. You could also become an Extension Master Food Volunteer. So this is going to be location dependent. It's not as common throughout the state of Kansas, but there are a good five or so locations, I believe, that offer this program. And these volunteers would then teach about nutritional, values of food and food preparation in general, when it comes to being able to process your produce and make it useful. They also assist in many food access initiatives, as we saw with the Kitchen Restore program. You can also become an Extension Master Naturalist. This one is, again, location dependent throughout the state. I believe there's only a handful currently. However, all of our food comes ultimately from our natural resources. So preserving those natural resources is another way to contribute. And some more ways to support in general would be to support your local farmers. So remember that ultimately, all of these avenues of having extra food around are ultimately going to help when it comes to food security. So your local farmers are a big part of that. And the ways you can go about doing that would be going to farmers markets, participating in CSA programs, which, if you aren't familiar, it's essentially, a subscription program with a local farmer that you get a different batch of healthy produce from the garden every month. There's U-Pick operations that may be in your area, and there's also agritourism operations that may be in your area. All these avenues ultimately contribute some form of food to the community. And because we wanted to really give you as many resources as we can here, you may also want to check out the Kansas Local Foods webpage. And so this was developed through, obviously, the Local Foods initiative that I referenced earlier. And it is a great resource to check out as far as any of the sort of technical, aspects that you may need to look at. So that even, when it comes to community or growing your business or producing food or finding local food, I mean, each one of those little tabs has a plethora of resources that have sort of been collected from across the country to help you out. We also have here locally our Joko Eats website, which is again developed by Chelsea King, our nutrition and health agent. And it's a great resource that can help out when it comes to the processing again of your food so that you know what to do with it once it is produced. So quick and healthy recipes, and for nutritional information on growing your own food, and then culinary guides, etc., food pantry listings, etc., that can really help you out. If you're really passionate about, wanting to get involved with producing food locally or becoming a grower, say, by chance, there's the Growing Growers program. It has closed this year. It was, applications or scholarships. I'm sorry, apply by March 1st. So yes, it has closed this year. However, it is available every year, and there's different tracks that you can explore. And essentially, you learn how to grow things as a specialty crop producer would produce their produce. And then also keep in mind that if you're, again, really gung-ho about urban food systems or food systems in general, there is the Urban Food System Symposium that is coming up this fall, hosted by K-State, as well as a handful of other universities contributing. And that is here in Kansas City. So if you're really looking for, some intricate information about food systems and ways you can support, this is a conference you could potentially attend. And with that, I thank you all for your time. I did end a little bit early here, but that is okay. We are going to go ahead and open it up for questions.
Right, great job, Anthony. Thanks for all that information. Okay, we do have a couple questions here in the chat.
Sure.
Somebody wants to know, where can they find information about their local CSA programs?
I think reaching out to your extension office again, and that's probably going to be a big answer I keep going back to here, but your extension office is probably going to be the first place that is going to have a great firsthand knowledge of which farmers are offering CSA programs. If not, I would attend, hopefully you have a local farmers market. A lot of those as well will be familiar with your local CSA programs. And if not, maybe your county health department as well.
Okay, and then also a reminder that all this information will be posted with the webinar. So I know Anthony shared so much great information, and it will be sent to your email probably tomorrow with the recording and a list of all the links and information that Anthony provided. If you have more questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we can get to more questions. Anthony, I have a question while we're waiting here.
Sure. Yes, go
What
ahead.
would be, what's your suggestion on ways to maybe start or even improve community garden efforts that are already happening, or if you're wanting to get one started in your local community?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when it comes to establishing a community garden, you first need to do a thorough site evaluation, making sure that in general it is a site that is going to be conducive to actually producing produce the way you want it to produce. If, say, you have a lot of deer pressure nearby, for example, or it's right next to a forested area, well, that's probably going to result in all your produce getting eaten, right? Or say you have a heavy clay soil there, or that area is prone to flooding. A lot of people may not be familiar, but if your produce touches floodwater, it's generally considered contaminated to where it can be consumed. So you really do have to kind of just go through the step-by-step process of what is the aspects for being able to grow food here that are going to hinder it and what is going to help it. And ultimately, you can install several different ways of being able to mitigate some of those issues. Say you have like a contaminated soil, you could always plant it to raised beds instead. Say you have deer issues, you can put a deer fence in. Um, it just kind of depends on the issues that show up. I would say very first step, get a soil test. Be sure that you're going to that area and making sure that it's, not highly alkaline or something along those lines. And then even if it is, you can go through and start amending that soil and making it so that it's, again, something that's conducive to being able to produce food. And then as far as supporting, your established community gardens, um, they are often looking for management. They're often looking for just volunteers in general. As many may be familiar when it comes to growing a vegetable garden, staying on top of weeds is always an issue. Keeping things watered is always an issue. But even, the fun stuff like harvesting the produce or taking that produce to a pantry, that all requires volunteers to be able to make all of those pieces operating efficiently. And it can't be done by just one person. It can, but it's not going to be nearly as efficient as if you have a core group of volunteers there. And generally speaking, you can reach out to your local extension office. They're going to have lists of your local community gardens that could use some help potentially.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, there's lots of questions about local, where they can find their local community gardens, and we put that link in the chat, but also reach out to your local extension office. They will have that information. Do you know much about the grant funding that we can find for community gardens, maybe through the state of Kansas to help with water access or accessibility?
Sure. I don't off the top of my head know of specific grants, but there are always, sort of sporadic and random grants that are popping up. So I, again, would say reach out to your local agent and just see if anything is on their radar currently. That's another thing that our local food systems team at the state level can help you out with. They do have a pretty good finger to that pulse of what's currently available and kind of point you in the directions that you might be able to explore.
Okay, thank you. Somebody is asking, how is the Food Forest program integrated into the community locally?
Thank you for asking about the food forest. I forgot to highlight that one in here, and that's another thing. So, the food forest program, specifically that we have here in Johnson County, is essentially a collaboration between our master naturalists and our master gardeners, and their whole purpose is working with the environment as opposed to against it in order to produce food. It is meant to be not necessarily a food source, but a supplemental source that demonstrates how you can still produce some food that will supplement your food along with being ecologically conscious of the environment around you. So that is a great, avenue to explore if you're, say, you really have, interest in the naturalists or natural resource um, avenues of being able to support food systems. But in general, it's newer things popping up, and we're very excited about it.
Awesome. Okay, I have another question here. What do you have a favorite crop that is maybe really bountiful when you harvest it that you really like to donate, or any varieties that you think do really well that are great to
Sure.
donate?
So I'll tell you, we ho I manage a community garden here in Johnson County as one of our programs, the Sunset Community Garden. And every year, the biggest producer that we have for the local food pantry we partner with is our sweet potatoes. They're generally very easy to grow. We always source them through the slips for the sweet potatoes through K-State's trials, actually, and the Covington and Beauregard varieties. They generally will produce close to 500 pounds of produce that goes into the pantry every single year. And that's not utilizing a ton of space either. You will run into a few issues here and there when it comes to production, particularly if you have voles in your yard. That is something that's going to hinder sweet potato production very secretively that you might not find out till the time you're harvesting it. But you kind of just have to keep an eye on that. Always be looking at the undersides of your leaves and monitoring for pests and disease and whatnot. Other things that are, quite abundant, I think, particularly your zucchini, those are always hard to stay on top of and very easy to, allow to be oversized. I know of quite a few people that will, if they get an oversized zucchini, just throw it away or compost it. But ultimately, that can be seeded, shredded down, put into breads and what have you. So that those are good candidates for food pantries. Um, Even, your tomatoes, those are going to produce tons and tons of produce for you, ultimately to a point where you're going to have extra that can be contributed elsewhere as well.
Awesome. Yes, I love sweet potatoes.
Mhm.
Okay, do you have any suggestions if we're starting a community garden on maybe an area where the soil isn't very great? How would we improve that soil?
So, depending on what the actual, construction of or composition of that soil is, I would say if it's too bad, go with raised beds. And then you have the soil under your control from the get-go. I will say, generally speaking, when it comes to filling raised beds, you are better off building the mix than coming with a premix. So that means taking your own parts of compost and manure and topsoil and mixing it on your own. Um, However, if you were to just go into the ground itself, mixing all those same components into plots will help it out. Generally speaking, as well, when it comes to amending your soil and making it so that it's conducive for plant growth, adding compost is going to be something that always helps out your garden, no matter what soil structure you have. That's because if you say have like a clay soil, it's going to make it so water percolates through the soil a little bit faster, so you're not rotting your roots and excess moisture. Or if you have like a sandy soil, it's going to hold on to that extra moisture a little bit longer and essentially act like a sponge, holding that moisture there so the plants can then absorb it. The only caveat to that is if you have a little bit too much compost, it really shouldn't go above 10%. You may create issues where it becomes kind of a hydrophobic soil situation where the water essentially bounces off of it and goes away. So you do want to try and avoid having an excess of that.
All right. Well, that was all the questions I saw, and everyone is really excited about all this information. I think it was really important. So thank you for sharing that, Anthony. And we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. So I'll hand it over to Kenny.
Yes, thank you guys. We typically have more questions than we have time for, but regardless, we'll be sure to link any additional resources, any pertinent information on our website, along with the recording. We hope these resources will help answer any questions you have, but if you need more information, please feel free to reach out to your local extension office. Once again, thank you for joining the K-State Garden Hour webinar series hosted by K-State Extension. We are so glad that you are here with us today to learn about food insecurity and how to manage that. You can visit the K-State Garden Hour website to view our recording for the Garden Hour in the archive, or to make a tax-deductible donation to support the continuation of this program. This session was recorded and it will be posted on our website by tomorrow afternoon. Answer the webinar. After this webinar ends today, you'll receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. Please answer your evaluation survey. Please fill this out. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at gardenhour@ksu.edu. Thank you again. We hope you continue to tune in each and every month. Thank you for joining. Have a great week and happy 4th of July.